Okay, guys, today we've got something to talk about that is very important to me, as it very closely connects to me in a pretty significant way. This video is probably going to affect me long term, but I think it's very important that content creators and players and people who are engaged in the Gacha community in general look at what's going on. We acknowledge these things and call things out for what they are. There's been some recent reveals of information that I think is not good, and I think is a genuine danger to the Gacha gaming space, to streaming, to content creation in general. And it's something that I honestly don't think we can allow to happen. And so I want to do my part in at least like drawing attention to this, going over it, helping inform you what it means and why it is such an issue. So let's get in and talk about it. So the thing I want to talk about today is this right here, this leaked information that came from a contract provided by Yomiholic, which is a third-party company that facilitates sponsorships for content creators from bigger developers and companies. And there is some really concerning verbiage that's in this, and something that I think a lot of content creators should know and be very wary of, and that players should know too, so they're informed as to what may be going on with some other channels on the platform. But before we get fully into this, let's provide you a little bit of context and how some of these things work. So something that's not that uncommon to happen in the industry, to happen for YouTube channels, for content creators, is to be sponsored by a company to make content for a game. A perfect example of this is Mtashed. Mtashed has been sponsored by AFK Journey to create content for them, and he is financially compensated for that. He is paid as long as those videos perform to an expected degree. He's been very public about this. He talked about this on his recent video on his channel. You can go and check that out. I'm not leaking anything there. That's a very normal arrangement that would take place. And of course, if you are going to fall into that kind of arrangement with a company, there's going to be some stipulations. Some of those stipulations range from completely reasonable and understandable to sometimes being completely egregious oversteps and a massive problem. Now, just to give you an example of requests that I think are reasonable is not being able to slander or disparage the company who's sponsoring you. I think it's fair to say that if a company is going to be putting a bunch of money behind your channel to sponsor you to make content, that you're not directly insulting the company that is doing that. And that's not the same as one thing that I think is an unreasonable request, which would be to not be able to be critical of the game you're making content on. I would say that is where you cross into overstep, because I do think there's a difference between criticizing a game, systems, characters, how they've been implemented into the game so that you can improve on it, especially when you're talking about constructive criticism. You should definitely be able to give that whenever you are making content for a game. But if you are not allowed to be critical in that form, I think that's an overstep and is a problem, and is a contract that you probably should not take, because it's going to hurt your credibility as a creator. However, not slandering the company specifically for other things that might be a little more liable, I can understand that. I think there's a reasonable lines that can be drawn. They're putting a bunch of money into the content that's being made. They don't want it to necessarily to come back to hurt the company overall. It's a fairly reasonable request. However, there are times when these requests, like I said, go way too far, and there is a perfect example of one that is happening right now. And that brings us back to this contract piece right here. Now, of course, when we talk about those arrangements that I was previously talking about, the creator still ultimately owns the channel and is in control of the channel. So if they choose to have other kinds of partnerships, that usually falls in line of their control or something that they are able to do. I think I have heard whispers that sometimes you may talk about certain competitors to the game. They may not allow you to take certain sponsorships for direct competition games, which can kind of make sense. You don't want somebody to come into a Zenless Zone Zero video where all of a sudden you're now advertising for, I don't know, Punishing Grey Raven or something crazy like that. Like, that makes a little bit of sense. But what we're seeing in the verbiage here is definitely a step beyond that. Now, I'm not a lawyer, this is not legal advice, but I have heard a lot of other people give interpretations on this section, and this seems to be the accurate read of what's going on here. So taking a look at section E at the top of this section, it says the content creator shall promptly notify Yomiholic if any other gaming brand intends to sponsor their content. Yomiholic has full discretion to reject sponsorships that could be detrimental to Zenless Zone Zero or the content creator's reputation. Did you catch where the problem was? There's two specific areas where that's a problem. First, other gaming brand. What is another gaming brand? That is a very vague terminology. I've heard some other people talk about that could You could make the argument that certain hardware companies, certain supplement companies like GamerSups or G Fuel could be classified as gaming brands. And so could that risk you having a partnership with some of those other companies? Could that risk a content creator not being able to talk to you about other things that they enjoy or services that they use simply because, well, maybe that could be detrimental to the brand? Which brings us to the other section that is a problem, is that word detrimental to Zenless Zone Zero or the content creator's reputation. Now, of course, based on the name there, we know exactly who this company is and what the problem is for. And now for some of you who may be thinking, well, this is Yomiholic's contract, so maybe it's not Hoyoverse's fault. Look, even if they contracted a third-party company to put this contract together, at the very, very minimum, they needed to sign off on this. So regardless of if it was their words or not, they still approved it, so they're still on the hook. Let's be clear about that. You can't just wash your hands of it. You still signed off on it. You still said that it was okay for them to use it. But that term, that could be detrimental to Zenless Zone Zero or the content creator's reputation. What does detrimental mean? That's a very vague term, and it's an intentionally vague term. The term detrimental there could be classified as, well, maybe it brings them to another game that they want to play instead. Or maybe there's a brand like G Fuel that they don't want you to sponsor because G Fuel is actually affiliated with some other content creators that they don't like, or Logitech maybe, or some of these other gaming hardware companies, the gaming chairs that you can get. Any of them could be at risk of being called off, that you cannot have sponsorships with those companies in any of these videos that you're doing content for, because it could theoretically be detrimental to the brand. That is a controlling term. That is an open-ended term to prevent you from connecting with or using any of those other brands. And why is that a controlling term? Well, some of you may not know, and it's not included, unfortunately, in this contract. So I hope we can get maybe some more full details to it. But generally speaking, when there are terms like this in a contract, there are penalties for not meeting those terms. Meaning there will be some kind of financial consequence that if you don't notify Yomiholic that you have those sponsorships, or if you do a sponsorship and it turns out to be a detrimental sponsorship, there's going to be financial repercussions for that. And generally speaking, from the numbers that have been floated around, it's not a small amount of money. And why? And that's even worse when you think about the general content creators that are going to be signing for a contract like this. When you're a smaller content creator like myself, this kind of contract can be super appealing because it basically gives you some guaranteed income. Content creation is a really big, it jumps around. It fluctuates a lot on what you can actually make from creating content. So if you can land a contract like this that gives you some degree of consistency, and you know that the game that you're focusing on is going to have returns on it, it can be great. It can help your security, it can help you grow, and it helps pay the bills. But it becomes in a way like golden handcuffs, where they've now prevented you from connecting with other companies that may be able to help your brand and your credibility, because you have fear of the financial penalties that could come as a result of this. And that's not a good thing. That's a terrible thing. I think this is also detrimental not only to the content creators and the smaller content creators like myself who want to come through and make these kind of contracts, but I think it also hurts the viewer, because now a content creator is prevented from potentially talking about other games or brands or any kind of sponsorships in that realm, because they're not allowed to share it because it could be a risk to the company that's sponsoring the video. But I think it also starts to hurt the community as a whole, because now you've continued to silo creators more and more into a specific area that they can no longer step out of without risk of financial repercussions. That's a dangerous thing, and I really don't think that's a good thing that we should be looking at or supporting. So I'm just gonna go out there and, put my flag in the sand here and say I think this is a pretty dangerous kind of terminology that I really hope people don't sign on for, because I think it's going to have a very negative effect on the community overall moving forward. I should also mention as well something that, shout out to Shinya for kind of like blowing the siren on this and getting people notified. But Shinya also managed to point out that this company, Yomiholic, is connected with some other publishers as well. And so that is just something to keep in mind as we kind of continue to keep an eye on this and learn more about these contracts. If you have any concerns about the credibility of the contracts, there have been some other recent posts from multiple content creators, not just from Shinya, but also Gacha Smack and others who verified the legitimacy of this contract. I know some people have tried to detract from it by saying, well, there's spelling mistakes and other things there. I think it can be chalked up to localization issues. I agree with that take on it. And this has basically been cross-referenced by multiple creators that this is a legitimate contract that's being handed out there. So if that's where you're going to try and detract the comments down below, that's not going to be the case. I want to address one more criticism quickly too that I've heard other people bring up and talking about that, well, this is pretty standard for non-compete. So this is something that, like, you know, happens all the time in the industry. Well, one, non-competes kind of suck anyway. And actually, I believe it was the state of California has already started to create legislation on that non-competes are not actually enforceable by law in the way that a lot of these non-competes have been written up. But the other thing that I will say as well is, generally speaking, if you are getting a non-compete added into your contract, it is because the financial compensation for it is justified, and most often is usually in the case of a full-time employment position. There may be some exceptions that where like certain contract work has some kind of non-compete associated with it, but generally speaking, I've only encountered it into full-time salaried positions, like as an employee of a company. But like I said, even regardless if that's the case, I don't think it holds water either way. I think it is a pretty negative component to it. And I think it literally exists to control creators and to stifle competition. And in an area where, you know, Hoyoverse has a pretty big grip on a lot of games and on the space, I don't think as content creators that we can just like sit by and allow them to continue to do that. Even for the short-term gains, I think this will have long-term repercussions in a pretty negative way. At least that's my take on it. So if there's any other smaller content creators out there who do watch my channel and you are looking at this, I would encourage you not to do it. That's just my take on it. But look, I'm not a lawyer, so ultimately you got to do what you got to do. I mean, I'm a small aspiring creator too, but like if you start compromising on these things, I don't know what to say about the long term. Again, I just want to give one final shout out again to Shinya. He is the one who has been kind of, you know, pulling up the information on this. He's kind of the first one who has been bringing these details to light. So I do want to just give a quick shout out and thank you to him for doing that. And, you know, keep on doing the good work. Keep on keeping it out there, guys. But that's going to be it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.